in 2010 that gave us more of a clear process with abandoned homes and dangerous structures, requiring them to secure the structure, board and seal the structure within a 10-day window, and for the building official to be able to determine whether or not one classifies as an emergency versus just one that can be demoed or repaired and have a time frame.
What comes to mind was that mobile home right next to River Sink Elementary School there. I think it's recently been cleaned up and removed. I don't know if that was a code enforcement issue, but that's just one that comes to mind.
There's quite a few that we've got.
While commissioners can file a complaint, both board members cannot.
Well, Randy touched on what I was getting at. I wasn't trying to advocate police state by no means, but just, a lot of times people feel like they're the misfortunate ones that wound up with it, where they can look and see someone else that wasn't quite as, someone that was more fortunate, and it can wind up being if one neighbor doesn't like another neighbor, it's an easy way to get back at them.
Yes, but and these codes are in place for a reason, and it's to ensure that the safety and the welfare of the citizens for all, even the ones that may be the alleged violator. However, code enforcement will make every effort to work with a property owner. Our goal is voluntary compliance, and there is a process if they'd like an extension. They can explain their hardship, and that can be done within in-house. As long as there's a good faith and getting it cleaned up or getting it resolved and in compliance, we'll work with them. It's the ones that refuse to comply or we can't get any action from them that there is the next step in our process would be forwarding them to the Code Enforcement Board, which is, I believe we'll go right into our next. If it's not corrected, we prepare a notice of hearing and a statement of violation, which is sent to the property owner, certified mail, and we're going to request a case go before a code board. This code board is quasi-judicial hearing. The members are made up of citizens that the county commissioners have voted. They have the authority to subpoena alleged violators, take testimony under oath, issue orders having the force and effect of law. They establish and levy fines pursuant to Florida Statute 162 and Chapter 8 of our county code, and they can also direct staff to hire a vendor to clean the property, correct violations, secure or remedy the safety issue on dangerous structures.
Tammy, would you say most, and I would suspect this is true, of your violations are either building something without a building permit or a rental property that's run down, or a non-homestead property? In other words, like I know Ernie Thoreau's in South Choppy was for that addition he did without a permit.
I would probably be safe with giving about 80% of properties being non-owner occupied.
There's not a lot of
homeowners
that need to clean their yard up.
Owner occupied, correct. A lot of them are rentals.
Have been building codes, like Catalina, Hartline was building a structure without a permit. Ernie's was the same.
Well, keep in mind, we have over 140 something complaints that are open and active currently. It's the ones that are at the end where there is a lien against the property is when the BOCC gets involved. It goes to the code board, and even the code board can give them 60 days from the time it gets to the code board. The board has to provide them a time frame for correction, and in the event that they don't meet that time frame, then the daily fine would kick in, and that's
The daily fine of $50, is that what?
Well,
It's being,
honestly,
Maybe before you go on, what percentage of the complaints are handled through your office and don't actually get the code book?
I'd say about 60%. Yeah, and I would like, that number might come down just because we're not, now that we have an extra person, we're not going to take as long to process some of these cases. you know, we're going to request that if an extension's needed, they need to put something in writing, and that extension's good for that time frame, and that's it. In the past, we've worked with people, as long as progress was being made, we could give them a little bit more time, but at this point, we will grant extensions based on the progress being made, depending on the hardship. But it will have to be in writing, and we would follow up with an approval or denial of the extension in writing as well. But we're not going to sit on these cases and let them continue. We're going to go ahead and start pushing them forward if we can't get them to voluntary comply within our time frame.
Do you have any estimate as to how much expense to the county in dollars, staff time, every one of these extensions? Because what I'm looking at is, like, from the time that you have a complaint come forward, some of these things seem, well, we just, the last one we dealt with on the forgiveness issue was years went by. Why do we let ourselves get in that position?
Well, there were several...
And how much does it cost us?
And James, did that, was there a cost?
Yeah, there was.
Okay, that's a rough estimate on, it's in your packet, Commissioner. And that's something, James was helping me with and worked on for me, just kind of give a rough estimate on, what it actually costs for the code board.
That's the code board, you know. But what I'm saying is, before it even gets to the code board, when you're issuing extensions, how much does that cost the county as far as staff time and dollars?
All we have right now, to as far as numbers, Commissioner, is what Maximus Fee Study provided us, and that was actually done in...
That's what we really need to talk about a little later, too, is the administrative
Well,
fees,
yeah,
I think. What
there's
you
not a
get
date on that.
The hard cost.
Yeah, well, that's part of it. And the other thing is, I think there's been a philosophy of trying to do everything in the world, and I'm not saying it was wrong philosophy, I'm saying that's what we've been operating on, to try to do everything to facilitate this case, whatever case that is, from getting to the Code Enforcement Board. And in that light, it seems to me people have sort of understood the system, some people, saying, well, nothing's going to happen until the stuff hits the wall,
There's no fines during that period.
and I don't have to do anything. And I do the barest minimal, and I'm covered for another 6 months or a year.
So you want to see, prior to it going to the code board, staff to kind of hammer down on the time frames that it's taking to get in compliance. I'm not really...
Either they get into compliance and they make meaningful effort to get into compliance, and they don't. It's like if you're the state trooper and you're stopping me on the highway and say, hey, you're going 80 in a 40-mile-an-hour zone, and I say, oh, okay, I'll lower it down to 70 for the next 20 miles, and then after that I'll lower it. No, that's unacceptable. I mean, you're either going to clean this stuff up, and if you have a hardship there, how can the county help you get this done? Okay?
Sure.
We want to get this thing done. We want you to be in compliance, but we don't want to be here issuing extension after extension, making inspections that we don't have to make because someone's not getting into compliance. And I'm sorry if I'm sounding like a hard nose, but that's...
Yeah, I agree. And this study was actually done back in 2007. So,
There was another concern that goes kind of sort of what Commissioner Kessler was mentioning about when I look at the value, when I look at the amount of some of these liens are $20,000, $25,000, $30,000, and whenever some of these people couldn't even buy a Happy Meal if they wanted to, and they don't have the funds, you know, but it goes on and on and on, it gets up to that point.
well, keep in mind, again, just to reiterate, the staff involvement prior to it going to the code board. We give every opportunity, we make every effort to have them voluntary comply.
Now, the notice of violation, does that have a time frame on it, or when it goes to the code board?
No, the notice of violation, per Florida statute, we have to, in order to get proper notice, they have to be notified of the violation, they have to be given reasonable time to comply, and given a time frame for that compliance.
But some things are just not playing devil's advocate, I'd say, but some violations are different. If it's picking up trash, that's one thing. If it's going and getting a wind load analysis and a building permit for a shed that you built, you know, 5 years ago, that your neighbor got mad at you because he was cat mad and they called you in, that's a little different. Those take longer.
Well, that's the thing with code enforcement, is that we'll issue the notice of violation for the failure to get the permits. In order for them to be in compliance with code enforcement, they have to apply for the development permit application and submit for the building permit. And it's complied on my end. Now, you have a time frame with a building permit, so if they don't comply with the building side at that point, it goes back to me for processing. So regardless of what the nature is, as far as that example, they've complied with me by showing good faith and applying for the DPA and the permit. So that could it could be a site plan review, which is a 3-month process. As long as they've submitted and paid for their application, it's in compliance on my end, and it's closed out. So it reopens if they fail to finish the process with building or planning or whatever the application is. So, once it gets to the code board, the board will enter the order of findings and facts. They'll determine if there's a violation. They will also give the property owner at that time another compliance date, but this is an actual order from the code board of the compliance date. They will impose fines within that order. Now, oops.
These fines, only if they don't come into compliance by the date the code board sets forth.
Yeah.
Well, with one exception. There's an administrative fee cost that even if they comply the next day, you still have to pay.
Okay.
But if we give them 30 days to get in compliance,
It's not in here.
then the fines don't start accruing until the 30 days.
Now, per Florida statutes, a daily fine can go up to $250 per day. What our code board has done in the past, when it was first created back in 2005, they would have your standard $100 for the first day and $10 per day as long as it continues. As we get further into the years, here we are 2013, they're consistent with their daily fine of $150 for the first day and $50 per day. And it just depends whether or not the nature of the violation, if it's a repeat violation. But there is a maximum that we can go per Florida statute, which is that $250 per day. It can go up to $500 if it's a repeat violation, which that is same owner, same violation, and it's found in violation by the code board within a 5-year period. They can go up to $500 per day. That administrative charge is something that we started in 2007 when Maximus Fee Study came out with a general $150 administrative charge for the cost of staff to process one case to the code board. That's with a standard issue of notice of violation, the materials that go with the code board, the advertisements, and the post-inspection.
Guys, realistic number?
And that was 2007. Now, talking with my code board, we feel that might need to be increased at this time.
Can we do that without a study, Heather?
As long as it's based upon data that we have and we can verify and apply, yeah.
Studies.
But you can't just pull it out of the air.
No, but
What was
that's
the
something
number?
that can...
How much
$150 altogether.
per claim?
per case, and that's generally assessed for even having the board or the case going before the code board.
If it goes to the code board, that's what Ron was talking about, that's that.
Staff recommends that. Now, the code board has in the past, depending on financial hardships or the situation, it's up to the code board, but they can waive that fee if they so choose. It's their discretion.
But they have made it all with the code board at that point. For whatever reason, they haven't fixed whatever needs to be.
Correct. And once it goes there, staff will request that we get that administrative charge for sending it to the code board. Do you have another question, Thomas? Commissioner Thomas?
I'm good, thank you.
Oops. Once the code board issues their order and they give the owner a compliance date, we have to go back out there as staff and re-inspect to verify whether or not they brought it in compliance per the code board order. At that time, we will issue an affidavit, whether it's an affidavit of non-compliance or if it's an affidavit of compliance. If it's in compliance, we'll follow with an order acknowledging compliance, and it's recorded at the clerk's office, and it's closed case. If it's not in compliance, we issue the affidavit of non-compliance, and it's sent certified, and the owner has 10 days to appeal. Would that be the proper term? Appeal the affidavit, or they can contest it, and whether or not they disagree with the code
They may have
board.
thought they fixed it.
So they have another opportunity to contest it. And then after that 10 days is expired, we will issue the order imposing the fines, and that's what's recorded with the clerk's office, and that's when your fines kick in. So there's quite a bit of process prior to it actually starting to generate a fine every day. Now, once the order imposing the fine has been recorded at the clerk's office, it kicks in and also follows with a notice of lien. Now that lien is recorded with the clerk's office, and it's only the BOCC, or it says the governing body, can satisfy or release that lien. We, as the code board, showed a little bit of concern with that process, and once the ordinance was created to allow someone to seek a reduction, the code board wanted to be able to have a recommendation before it went to the BOCC. So again, once the lien's recorded, an owner has an opportunity to seek a reduction or a satisfaction. It does go to the code board for a recommendation, and then the BOCC will have the final decision on whether or not they wanted to reduce, satisfy, release such lien. You cannot file or you cannot foreclose on homestead property. The ones that aren't homestead, there's a 3-month period before we can recommend foreclosure or actually foreclosing, and a lien shouldn't continue for a period longer than 20 years from the filing date.
You can write it out. Can't be.
But after 3 months, the code board can authorize the county attorney to foreclose on the lien or sue to recover, but it is subject to final approval by the BOCC.
So I don't think we really authorize, we recommend.
Correct.
And that's really one of the issues, goes back to what Richard's saying, is how these accumulate so high, is that we don't immediately go to foreclose after 3 months. Usually goes on a lot longer than that.
Well, we like to, and here's some of the
I'm
factors
actually
that
glad
we're
that we don't
looking into.
immediately go to foreclosing
Well, you
after
can't
3
foreclose
months.
homestead property anyway. You can't take foreclose on somebody's, but if it's a rental property, for example, I know there's a bunch of them around that are trashed out, or if they,
Probably 2/3 of the properties and liens on non-homestead.
And here, these are some of the factors that you would consider before foreclosing on a lien, whether it's not its homestead property, the amount and superior of prior liens. There might be a lien on it that's, the chances of the county recouping might be slim. The value of the property, and any encumbrance on the property.
let's say someone has a single lot in Wakulla Gardens, single wide on it, and they owe $20,000 on it. It wouldn't be worth our time then to even bother foreclosing on a code enforcement lien, because we'll never get the money. Is that kind of what you're leading to?
Yes, typically what we would like to do is look at a property and try to flag it before the property value, the lien exceeds the property value. But as far as getting in depth with the title and behind all that, I don't think staff would be able to know until it got the attorney.
We'll take first position on it. Our lien doesn't bank comes first.
Right.
Taxes first, bank second, and then we're third.
That's your first and second mortgage, all your mortgages.
We're after, and then it depends on time of filing, but we don't take priority now. No automatic priority like other governmental liens get automatic
So
priority.
if we don't foreclose on it, and the property's abandoned, let's just say the person just gave up and left, or that it's not worth their money anymore to fix it. These code enforcement liens keep building and building and building, and that's one thing I want to talk about later, is that takes away anybody's incentive to buy the property and fix it up. But anyway, we'll, after the slides.
Well, this is going back to the ordinance that the BOCC adopted to allow a property owner to request a reduction or forgiveness of their code board lien for whatever reason. The application has a $25 fee. The property must be in compliance, and that administrative charge must be paid before the application is considered. At that time, it's forwarded to our code board for a recommendation, and that recommendation, along with the application, is also presented to the BOCC to make the final determination from that point. And that's if a property owner applies for an application of a reduction or a reduction or forgiveness of a code board lien. And again, we've provided some factors when considering a reduction or forgiveness. The nature, how long the violation is continued, how often does this reoccur, the extent in which the county had, if we hired a vendor to clean up the property, or in order for us to bring the property into compliance, the record of events, filing the lien and purchases of the property, whether or not there are mortgages on there, whether or not the county was going to have a chance to recoup any of it, any previous reduction or forgiveness that were granted prior to the BOCC against the same piece of property, and whether or not the accrued amount of lien is compared to the value of the property. So if the lien exceeds the property value, it wouldn't be beneficial. Good?
My only comment on that is the lien, if the lien amounts to mainly fines, it could be that it's still worthwhile to foreclose. You know, it depends on if the hard costs exceed the value of the property. I think the hard cost of the foreclosure, if we're not likely to recover that money, you know, then maybe you're right. But let's say it's going to cost $1,000 to foreclose and the property's going to be worth $4,000 or $5,000. Well, maybe it's got a $20,000 lien on there, but if that's not real cost, if it's just fines, then maybe it's still worthwhile to foreclose.
I agree. So I just want to thank you, Jamie, for that presentation. Also, before I make another comment, if I might, Mr. Chairman, is we want to thank the Code Enforcement Board, the members that serve on it, for their time and efforts. I know the pay is what you do it for, but you know, it's appreciated. Your opinions are appreciated. But you know, I have several things. One of my big things is shortening up the process, where we don't have this before it gets to the code enforcement. Years go by. I think that's unacceptable. No matter what the circumstances are, I think it's unacceptable. I think we can do better than that. And the other thing is, I totally agree with Commissioner Thomas, is that, you know, that those fines and fees, they're out there, but if that land is sitting with that single-wide trailer or double-wide trailer on it, and there's land value of $8,000, there's no bank note on it, you know, there's no one in front of us, and we can go and cost us $1,000 to file and go through the process, I think we should. And yeah, we're not going to collect the $20,000, but we'll end up with a piece of property that maybe cost us $7,000, and sometime we can sell it for $7,000 or $8,000 or whatever it is.
I agree with that. I got, Rich, you got anything to say?
Well, I'm not going to name, I'm not gonna name the name of the person, but Jamie knows which one I'm talking about. There's one particular one, just to give you an example, which I've taken a personal interest in helping one individual, because I don't wanna see him lose his property. And the reason that I'm taking a personal interest, I've got a group that worked over the weekend for one particular case. This group's gonna come in and with the permission of the owner, who happens to be in jail right now, they're gonna come in and they're going to try to help clean his place up to get it to a state of compliance, so that he don't lose it. He's not able to help himself. He lives he's got 5 acres that's paid for. He lives in a camper that doesn't have any electricity, any water, anything, because he doesn't have the means to have it, and he doesn't have anyone else to help him. But at the same time, I'm not wanting to take that person's property away from them and essentially make them homeless. I look at it trying to help them, and it's just something I'm personally trying to do, and I would hope that the code board would not foreclose on that particular thing. So I had talked to Jamie earlier about the right way to approach the code board, which y'all are all here, that I am, that particular case, I am trying to help that person. And would we still foreclose on something like that? I mean, if you essentially, he has nowhere to go.
And I don't know the property you're talking about.
I'm not wanting to name his name, but,
Lengthy conversation.
yes, sir.
This came to Jamie not by a single complaint, but by a petition signed by all the neighbors.
In 2008.
2008. And it's an eyesore, it's a nice community, the 5-acre lots, people have pride in the community. They sit there and we jumped on it and issued orders for years. And nothing has been done to it. The code board didn't have money to go and hire contractors to go clean it up. So it's been sitting there. In the meantime, if I were a property owner, I'd be totally frustrated because my value is being impacted on the property there. And if I were trying to sell it to that next door, I would be harmed.
Well, I have an active,
Because, and I agree, it's a humanitarian issue, and that's why we've been over backwards. But if what you're saying, forgive the fines, give them the property, but you haven't solved the problem.
I'm not talking about forgiving the fines yet, just simply to get it to a point where we're not trying to take it away in order to give those who want to help time to get it cleaned up. What process needs to happen to give that person time to let a group clean up his place?
And I'm,
Said it started in 2008.
we're past that point.
Yes.
I wish it was dealt with, several years prior to this.
Anything bad?
I think having a file, I think. Anyone's supposed to have one. I'm thinking.
I've had lengthy conversations with them. I've worked with them as much as that I could.
And that goes back to the point of shortening up these things also. I mean, we all understand there are hardships up there, but I think Jamie, over the years, I don't think anyone can say that Jamie has been really tough on these people. Jamie has bent over backwards, given them every opportunity to meet her, not halfway, but a quarter of the way there. And when people don't even demonstrate the willingness to try to meet Jamie at some point, I think it's very difficult to turn around and say, let's forget this, let's make it right.
Couple points, I have several points.
Building wants to speak again.
Huh?
Building.
I was going to add something kind of along those lines. The building department, when it's the building department, when it is a building-related case, we make every effort to try to get them in there and get a permit without even putting it on her. Since I've been there now, we get a building-related case, one of us are going to go out there from the building department and look at it. Or she ever has to even send out a letter. I've directed a staff member today of something that I observed on 267 going on with no permit. Go send them a note, leave them a note, come get a permit. I'm not going to hammer them with a double the permit if they'll come in and get the permit.
I've done a bunch of after-the-fact engineering on stuff like that too.
Yeah, and it's, the whole idea is just get compliance out of it to begin with. And if I can get them in there, it's
great.
not monetarily driven. So we're trying to give them every opportunity to come on. It's just if they want to be obstinate, whatever, then they're going to have to deal with the code board. But from the building side of it, and if it's really old, something arbitrarily, like I say, go patrolling around and I'm gonna pick this person to file a complaint on, but if it's obvious, like I said, 267, and I directed a staff member today, go leave them a note and come get us a building permit. Rather than giving it to her and just say, all right, we're gonna get them.
Good, I'll
I
forward.
want
Notice of correction.
to ask one more thing. We had talked about this also. That individual actually has two against him, one for the nuisance and the other for living in the camper without no water, no electricity. Well, for several months, maybe even a year, he's going to be living at the sheriff's department. So will he still be accruing that $50 fine every day for for living in a camper for, I think while he's in the sheriff's office, that $50 fine needs to maybe be suspended and not be, I mean, while he was living there, I can understand, but while he's going to be living somewhere else for a little while, I think would the code board would consider suspending that $50 fine.
And that can be something that we can bring before the code board to discuss. I don't think legally we can talk.
You're saying it's gonna be brought into compliance. Jamie will come back to the code board and say it's now in compliance, and the fines will stop at the date that she stopped accruing. But that which has accrued would still be on the book.
I can't give a definite date when it's going to be initially been, but I am actively working to organize a group to help him. We're going to go and get his permission to go on his place to do it while he's where he's at. But it is something that I am working on.
And just to pick up on something that Mr. Pisecki had said, that it's not just the person that's in violation that is affected by these things. It's all of his neighbors who are affected by this, and their rights are also being infringed upon.
And if I could maybe offer some comments too, I assume this is probably about as complicated as it gets, a case like this, because who in the world wants to throw someone off of the only piece of property they own? And even if you get it cleaned up, if he goes back to the camper, he's in violation again, just by living in the camper, so that starts the whole cycle over.
Need some outside help, and that's what I'm working on doing.
Yeah. And I guess the big question is, legally, by rights, we could take the property, throw him off of it, but what's the cost to society once we do that? Where's he gonna live, at the jail from that point? I mean, I don't know who's gonna,
But what he's currently
somehow.
living is not safe.
Yeah.
It's unhealthy to him, to his
He has a
health.
city water meter in front of his place, but he doesn't have the money to turn it on.
Well,
Okay, we got it.
even if he turned it on, though,
I have a
he
question
still
on
can't
this
live in a
water and
camper.
electricity. Is there an ordinance that says you have to have electricity in order to live in a house?
Well, didn't you say it's a
Florida Building
camper?
Code.
It's an actual camper. It's a pull behind.
He can't live in a camper even if he's got
Right, but
water.
if it was a house, do you have to have electricity in order to live in a house?
You gotta have heat, I know that.
It's a Florida building, it's Florida
Well,
building code.
I'm
correct?
ignorant of it, I just want to find out.
And you don't have to have AC, but I think you have to have
Well, you've got minimal housing.
your minimum standards.
You have to have lighting, you have to have a place to cook, and sanitation. That would be your primary.
Your basic minimum.
Place to sleep, and bathroom has to actually be private with a closed door. That's your minimum housing standards under Florida statutes.
Could the light be a oil lantern?
That leaves a lot
Yes,
to...
it could be.
So we could have a fireplace, an oil lantern,
Sure.
and we have water.
Yeah.
Water's a necessity to have water.
It's gotta
to
be-
have
Have
sewage.
heat, don't have to have air.
And it has to be at least 600 square foot per our code,
That's county ordinance.
per county though.
Heat with the stove.
So we don't have to technically have electricity, is what I'm asking.
No, sir.
Okay.
There's alternatives out there, and I'm a big pro-alternative guy. If you can build houses, something different, as long as they can meet the standards that we need for them not blowing away and being safe.
Now, we do have, that requirement within our non-owner occupied,
Yes.
yes.
Do you have to
Rentals.
have running water? Can you have an outhouse today? I mean,
As far as the owner occupied.
so you do have to have running water.
Sanitation, running water,
Yeah.
bathroom, lavatory, and a sink to wash your dishes.
Can't have a sink with a hand pump and a outhouse.
Can't have an outhouse.
You probably could.
You can't have an outhouse, you can have all the other, but not an outhouse. No privies.
And I know,
You can have one as long as it's not your primary means of disposal, I guess.
Well, you can have them
I don't know if you can still-
for nostalgic value, for fun, and for your
A little off track.
two-story outhouse.
Yeah.
The Sears Roebuck catalog.
I know, we got one comment, but I know you had a couple.
A lot of we've been talking about, we keep talking about the person who made the violation. I agree 100%, and that's really a key point to me. Just to use an example, I'm not gonna advocate for your person, but if they sold that property, the person that sold it went in and cleaned it up. My personal opinion, the person committed the violation, if they wanted to waive the punitive part of the fines, I would support it, just to get it cleaned up and be done. Now,
But the administrative needs to be maybe increased to cover our
I
costs.
think absolutely administrative needs to be increased to make it realistic and make that non-waivable. So, like when I bought that house in Tarpine, it'd probably still be in violation today if I had to bought it and went and had to tear down a really nice shed, by the way, that was built in a V-zone, and have the excavator come in and tear the whole thing down. Even though it had a brand new roof on it, remember, I had to have it, all the new shingles torn off, re-shingled, all back over again. I spent a lot of money on that house and lost a lot of money too, by the way. And then I asked for lien waiver, which it was waived, and I know part was already paid.
Yeah, you paid a partial.
I went into it with my eyes wide open. I knew it was there, but I think we need to incentivize people to either foreclosure, or as long as you're not the original owner, if you go in there and you clean it up, we should encourage waiving the punitive part of the fines, not the administrative part, but the punitive part, just to get it cleaned up. And by the way,
I can agree with
if
you
you
on that.
die, obviously, you're not the original owner anymore. That's why I was on Thoreau's property. I mean, the goal, I think, of code violation is to bring in compliance. He died, the person that committed the violation died, and I know we talked a lot about, well, this goes with the property, but then we're gonna have property sitting out there for years that nobody's ever gonna wanna buy because they could never, the liens are worth more than the property is. So, that's,
Just as far as to speak on behalf of the code board, they consider all of that when they come up with their recommendation to the BOCC. And in that particular case, they forgave the portion that on the day that he was deceased, that we got notification of his passing, from the time that it was brought into compliance. So our code board took that into consideration and actually forgave that portion of it. It was the part that the alleged violator committed the violation, regardless of the circumstances, though, regardless of the circumstance.
circumstances being that he did.
That was that much involved, well, I mean, it could be any hardship.
I understand, and I think if we increase, again, the administrative part that can't be waived, I think if you're in violation and you give it to your kid and the kid goes in there and cleans it up, your neighbors are happy, I would still be inclined, even if you gave your kid to waive the punitive fine, as long as it's not the original. I'm not saying let it go 3 years, all right, I'm finally gonna clean it up, and now I want my fines waived. No, I wouldn't support that at all. I'm saying if it's not the original violator.
Right, I'll agree with
Let me
everything.
give you an example of that, if I could, real
Yeah.
quick. We just saw it the other day. We went through this on Thoreau's, and we turned right around. We had a violation in Lake Ellen. I think Mr. Gray owned it. The code enforcement liens were so high that he gave it to the county, right? He gave
I don't
it-
know his reasonings for giving it.
Anyway, David, he gave the property to the county, right? The Lake Ellen. And we turned right around and forgave the liens to ourselves. If we're gonna be fair across the board, we should be,
Well, it hasn't been officially done.
well, we're gonna do it. We'd be insane to take a piece of property with a $20,000 lien on it and then try and pay the code enforcement department the $20,000. We waived our own liens, right? Because we bought it, or it was given to us, I'm sorry, and we're gonna clean it up.
Waiving the liens, you're taking the property
In lieu of,
We didn't end up with anything on Thoreau's. We didn't end up with the property, and we didn't end up with the fines. And it cost us, if you look at, the portion that you pointed out at the beginning when I was asking about cost, the cost of the code enforcement board, I was surprised to see that.
More.
And then the cost of, before it gets to the code enforcement board, all that it is a cost that the county is eating up. The county has to do something to come out a little better than this negative
That's why I
position.
suggested increasing the administrative fines that are non-waivable.
well, they're gonna have to be really
Whatever they are,
significant.
if they're $20, if they're $10 a day for Jamie's time, if they're everybody's time that they volunteer, and we all appreciate they do that, you know, that needs to all be factored in, which it's not right now, it's just a number, $150, which,
And what would you like to see staff? Like, just come up with a policy for our code board to have a set amount for
I'd like to see-
administrative charge,
maybe James. could-
regardless of the violation, regardless of any situation, just,
I'd like to see a realistic administrative cost, you know, both before it goes to the code board, I guess, well, I guess one could say before it goes to the code board, that's just part of your job, your salary, that's what.
yeah, and we're gonna,
Costing the county.
I understand, but
So
so
we're
is
gonna
having a
tighten
library.
down on that.
But it's
That's
just, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't, and once it goes to the code board, that's when the administrative part would kick in my mind.
Right, but having a library is a lot different than having a code enforcement board. If people obeyed the laws, we wouldn't need to have a code enforcement board. I mean, it would be the ideal situation. I mean, people aren't doing bad things to get a library, you know, it's like,
Well, some of these things also, Howard, I've driven 60 miles an hour in a 55 zone, I have to admit it. That, you know, someone could put a portable shed up they bought at Lowe's at their house, not knowing, hey, I was supposed to get a building permit for this. Their neighbor reports them because they don't like it, and then now they're in code violation. So there's different degrees of.
oh, yeah. And we heard our building department say that on instances like that, they're looking to, if they spot it, they're looking to even avoid the code enforcement path. You know, no one wants to drive things to code enforcement. I think that's pretty well agreed upon.
My main point, I guess, is to punish the person, not the property, because the goal is to get it cleaned up or fixed, and
At the same time, I don't think we need to reward.
absolutely not. That's why I said the original violator could not come in and have their fines, their punitive fines, like Richard's guy here.
Yeah.
He couldn't come in and say, all right, I cleaned it up, forgive all my daily fines. No,
The
absolutely.
best that
he
can
has that
happen is,
opportunity.
the best
He
that
would
can
have that
happen is you get it.
opportunity to do so.
And that's up to the board, I guess, if he wanted to do that, it'd be up to the code enforcement board to
No,
recommend
it would,
not.
it'd be up to it's not any different than the other case you heard. He can apply for an application, he could pay the $25 fine, clean up the property, they can recommend
The other case, you mean the one
satisfying,
that
release,
stopped
forgive, yes.
Well, that,
And then it comes before
again,
the
that guy's
BOCC.
dead. He is dead.
Not him,
Fine.
the other one that Commissioner Harden is referring to, the same would apply. If that gentleman wanted to come forward and apply for, once it's in compliance, and it's brought into compliance and everything, and he's paid the $25 fee and the administrative cost, he can come and would go to the code board for their recommendation, and in turn will come to the
I understand what you're
BOCC
saying. I guess my difference is,
for
in
forgiveness
Thoreau's
or
case,
reduction or...
that property was not, the original violator was not the one applying for forgiveness.
Correct.
In Richard's case, yes, the original violator would, to me, those are clearly different
Now, if I
situations.
understand it correctly, Richard's person's sort of not available to do anything at this
He's not available to do anything at all right now, even if he wanted
But as
to.
staff, we have no idea.
Yeah.
We have no way of knowing that.
There's a simple way to keep these things from accumulating to high amounts and to get the property in compliance, make the neighbors know. Is getting money for the code enforcement people to go in and clean up the property and make that the lien rather than let the fines accumulate. Now, Jamie, I don't know on this property, an unnamed person, we've talked for a year and a half about getting a contract agreement. And a lot of that property was salvageable material, but there was a value up in Tallahassee for metal.
There's a lot of salvageable stuff on that
And we never
property.
gotten an estimate of what it would have cost to clean that up.
Yes.
What was the...
I don't think we can speak without him being able to defend we can't speak specifically on a case without having him be properly noticed.
That's why I'm trying not to name him or nothing, just speaking in general.
Just let's be cautious about due process.
We, the code board, feel hamstrung in a sense that there's not sufficient
Let me ask you a question on that, if I may interrupt so I can understand. Are we talking about a vacant property or a property somebody's living in?
Property subdivision.
Okay, so
You would have to have their permission.
if we provided you with $5,000, you go in and clean it up, and we put that as a lien against the property. Okay?
Correct.
Now, that's pretty good, but how many $5,000 do we have? Now, even though if we wanted to, I'm not sure we have that many, because we had a...
The problem is that's about what we got in cleanup.
So,
That's
all we
the
have.
problem, is there's not enough to even get the,
As a result,
Get rolling.
almost $1 million
Yeah,
in liens.
and then
Ridiculous.
and we're not in the business of cleaning up properties either. I mean, and we would address the ones that are safety and health hazards. We
well, I'm not for...
would
I'm not-
focus more on those.
I'm not for cleaning up somebody's property because if you're incarcerated, possibly, that's a different story, but if you're just lazy,
Right.
I'm not exactly for cleaning up your property. I would agree with basically everything Randy said. Figure out what your time is, and if they clean the property up, then basically we waive the other. And
I was saying though, with a caveat, as long as they're not the original violator. You
Yeah.
don't want to reward someone for...
now, also, I'll add one thing to that. People have it doesn't matter what your intelligence is, they can figure out how to juice the system. And they'll sell it to their brother, their kid, or whatever. I would eliminate in-laws and outlaws.
Well, I thought about that some, Jerry, but again, the goal really is to get it cleaned up. And if somebody slips through the cracks,
Well, I guess
So they give it to the kid.
I guess that's right. If you can get that kid to clean it right up, but then I do agree with you on it, waive the other fees because they're just out there in the wind. But the expense that we absolutely have, our hard cost, is not waivable.
yeah, we definitely need to readdress.
Yeah, I think that would be something that, figure out what your hard cost is, and then if we can get somebody, but now you got a person who, all right, we go to them, and the property has after everything's said and done, it's got a $10,000 value. And they're just not doing anything. And they're just smiling as we pass down the road. Then basically speaking, we have to basically say, hey, enough is enough. And now if you sell it to your kid and he cleans it up, fine enough. But if you don't get that cleaned up and whatever, then we're gonna probably pop you.
Close.
Yeah.
And that I don't know if it's...
well, but also, but that scenario, that's the problem that we've got now, is and what Ron is trying to say is if we can, warn them and then head it that way, but then clean it up much faster, then that becomes the basis for that lien, and we can stop all the fines moving forward. Because the problem is, right now, the only mechanism you got to try to get somebody to do something is those fines leading up to foreclosure, and that's the reason you got such a large amount of it. If we could cut it off somewhere in the process, one would have a much more effective thing, but that's another problem. It takes money. But we got to get off of, we got to be able to increase in the next upcoming years, increase that cleanup budget. I'm not saying by a ton, but just increase it more than what it is currently.
I think
Is there a way to establish a maximum lien on a property based on the value? That seems, like Ron said, you can't have $1 million lien on a double wide in Wakulla Gardens.
Well, that's where it would take care of itself, and that, if you're able to stop the bleeding, if you may.
If we cleaned it up, the fines stopped.
That's right, the fines stop.
Right, if you clean it up, but you're cleaning it up with our money. I'm not being hard on you. You're cleaning it up with our money, and we don't have any money. We can't even put a roof on a leaking building.
But you also have an obligation to the Jody property owners.
Oh, I agree with you.
And again, though, instead of picking and choosing which ones we're going to clean up, we usually focus on the ones that are health and safety hazards, that we're going to expend county funds to get something cleaned up with the lien on it. We're not just going out there because he didn't do it and clean it up. So we try to be consistent on that end.
Well, you clean it up. I'm just trying to get up to speed. You clean it up, and he just continues to do the same thing. You haven't solved the problem.
The property's no longer creating a health and safety
But
issue.
give him a few days or a few months or whatever, and he'll be right back where he was.
Which we can
Potentially.
repeat complaints.
And then when you clean up, you're out that money. I mean,
Yeah.
it becomes a lien on the property, but you're
That is a-
still...
But you're still out the
haven't
money.
stopped
Correct, correct.
Now, this person, then,
I
it's
think
a
what-
little off, but if they just, and I'm only talking about, eyesores, if they put a privacy fence up, are they deemed to be in compliance? As long as nobody can see it?
There's one down on Surf Road that's made out of metal, tin roofing. It's not exactly a real good fence.
Okay.
Once she went out and has taken pictures to get it into compliance, somebody's got to validate that it is in compliance. If they've got the privacy fence and we can't see it, it's never going to get to that point, but that needs to be done before somebody files a complaint. If it's not bothering the neighbors and we can't see it, then it's obviously not really a problem, although it could be living in squalor.
It's a case by case.
Well, I won't say one more thing, just want to play advocate on one aspect. I think one reason some of these go on and on and on and on is a lot of people have a strong sense of property rights, that they own their property and have a freedom, constitutional freedom to do what they want to with their property. And sometimes I think that's the case, that some of these go on and on and on, but it turns into then sort of a property rights issue.
And I talk with people every day, and I would know that going in, and if that's the type of person that I'm handling, then most certainly we'll do everything in our power to work with them. But bottom line, you have codes out there that are in place. We give them ample, reasonable time, notice, and they choose whether or not they want to voluntarily comply or they refuse to comply, and then there's a process after that, which is your code board.
And most are not homestead properties.
Yeah.
Most of them are.
I mean, we work with them as much as we can. I mean, once it gets to the code board, we've done everything that we can do.
So, just to comment on property rights, I think we're a board that understands property rights, but I think a little balance is needed also. We also live in a society, and especially when we have neighbors, I think there's some kind of obligation to conform to the rules that society has put out for us.
Well, these are rules that board and your board have passed in the Village of County.
These are codes that they have adopted.
They mentioned Thoreau. There's a second case in Thoreau. Property right next to them. It never came to you because liens weren't in place. When the woman appealed, keep in mind, it wasn't a property owner that came, it was a real estate agent handling the property for her. She asked for a reduction on two cases. The one we recommended reducing and sent to you, and you waived. The second one came up and it was like $15,000.
It was $35,000.
$35,000?
For a lot, right? The vacant lot.
And you reduced it to 5.
We reduced it to 5 based on it being cleaned up, but the board voted and I signed an order for $5,000 placing a lien on that second piece of property. So there is a lien that's in effect. Now, did she ever appeal that one?
This is the one with the rundown house on it right next door to
Yes.
where he lived?
But she would have an opportunity to apply for a reduction of that one as well if she would like.
I want to touch on...
I don't think there's a time frame on when someone can apply for it.
I want to touch on one thing about it too. You know, whenever we have planning and zoning requests, it's pretty common that an agent comes and represents the owner. And is there something saying that we can't, in this case, have an agent represent the property owner as far as code enforcement?
Well, I guess, speaking for the board, and I've got other board members that talk to this up, but we had 2 cases with over $50,000. Nothing had been done for years. We felt that that person was that interested in it, they could at least make an appearance in front of the board and speak for it, instead of a real estate agent whose goal was to settle the property with the commission. And I know that had some influence in my determination. I don't know about the rest of the board, but we have a unanimous vote of 4 or 5 to 0, reducing the not prohibited.
Is there any way, do you think it's realistic to try to set a maximum lien, maybe whatever percentage value the property is? You know what I'm saying? If you got a $20,000 rental property and
I think you'll
buy it or
find,
you do whatever, and then I think the lien should be capped at maybe half the value of the property or something.
Well, the problem is, once I sign the lien, it's out of our hands. And it's it's only now, with the attorneys getting more aggressive, that they're looking at after 3 months on the lien, and doing the analysis whether it makes sense to do foreclosure. We haven't done that.
Case by
in the past.
case.
So some of these have gone on in lien status for 2, 3, 4 years, and at $50 a day, that doesn't take long.
Let's say it goes into foreclosure, all right, let's say 3 months, and we're foreclosing for $5,000. They can either A, pay it off, right, or
Yeah.
B, lose their house, realistically.
Lose their property, it's not allowed on homestead.
Not homestead, they lose their property, so maybe that's the answer we're looking for, is move a lot more quickly to that, because like you said, $100,000 lien might as well be $100 million, because nobody's gonna pay it.
Well, that's where we, as a county, look a little silly in the sense, because we have almost $1 million in unpaid liens. The bulk of them are rental properties, and then if you go item by item by item, the liens probably far exceed the value of what you're paying.
Well,
But there's no way to stop that until they're in compliance.
if like Randy said, if you folks get your hard cost, whatever your hard cost is, and then if they don't come into, after a certain period of time, if they don't come into compliance, we foreclose. But we don't foreclose on the fines, we foreclose on the hard costs. Or we can foreclose on the fines, well, no, we foreclose on the hard costs. And they can either clean it up and pay the hard cost, or we take the property. They clean it up somehow. When we're going after the property, they have the option of cleaning it up prior to foreclosure and paying the hard cost.
I think they've already, what Ron's point is, they've already had plenty of ample opportunities to clean it up before then.
Well, then we just need to figure, then
Foreclose
really,
on both, if they're the original violator, in my mind, you foreclose on both. The fines and the administrative costs. And the administrative costs is probably gonna be something variable. There's a lot more involved with you up front.
Yes.
But when one's sitting there for 5 years and you're not working on it every day, that administrative cost will probably go way down on a daily fine. And my only reason, I mean,
If it's constant, it wouldn't go up anymore.
now you mentioned that, Randy, when you actually, it's, people sort of understand push and shove. They'll do conversation for a long time, but once you file that foreclosure, it's push. So basically, if they pay our hard costs and clean it up, end of story, at that time, not the $50,000 additional fees. I know you'd like to get that, but that's probably not gonna ever happen. But if we go quickly to get the hard cost, if they clean it up prior to the foreclosure and pay the hard cost, we don't foreclose. We've got to clean it up properly and we've got a hard cost back.
and then they come to lien forgiveness. Now that,
We're not going to do that. We're not going to do a lien forgiveness on the hard cost.
no, exactly. But they, in your case, this person cleaned up before foreclosure, right?
Yes.
They would come before the code board and say, I want to get my punitive costs waived.
Well,
Then-
actually, they send it to you folks, then it comes down to us for review, then we send back your recommendation.
So I would, if I would
Once the
support,
lien's been placed, we cannot, we, the code board, cannot reduce it.
Yeah, it's up to you guys.
That's okay. We can, we can do that. But we figure out what your hard cost is. Put all your hard cost in there so that when we do forgive the lien, the property's cleaned up and we do forgive the liens, that we're not in the bottom end of that barrel.
So you have an idea of what we have involved so far, that maybe we can recoup that versus,
Well, that's your hard cost.
right.
well, in
I
my
got you.
mind, Jerry, I'm gonna differ with you a little bit on there. Like I said, if they're the original violator, I don't think we should support waiving even the fines.
Well, fine.
They've been given plenty of chances apparently to do it. But if we just don't let it go for so long, push them 3 months into it when it's not 30, when it's, say it's $500 or $600.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
$50 a day, if you violation for 30 days, you're $1,500.
I can agree with that.
And you know, you've got the majority of your code board members here, so I'm sure they're taking into consideration what you guys are saying. And when a case is, an application has been submitted for a request for a reduction, or even when it gets to that point, Commissioner Moore, I'm sure our code board will take those into consideration and at least try to recoup the hard costs that we have involved, but it will be up to them.
I managed a huge number of properties, and everybody would give me every excuse in the world why they didn't pay the rent.
Really?
But when my policy is that on Tuesday, I'm filing a lien at the courthouse. And the only way you can get between me and the lien is to have cash between me and the courthouse. Well, on Tuesday, they met me halfway between my office and the courthouse because it was push and shove. People won't move until you push.
Right, and I think that might be also their intentions with foreclosure, you know, we're hoping that people will come forward before it actually gets to a
You'll see a huge number of people, and like Randy says, if they're the original owner, if our fines are above the value, they'll just step away.
Yes.
And hardly any property has, almost all properties have value. And our hard cost is probably always below what the value of the property may be.
Yeah. I mean, you'll have some of those coming before you tonight that the county actually exhausted funds to clean up. Which those, to me, would be considered in your hard cost. If the county expended...
Yes, they would be.
Correct, right.
Money, time, labor, and funds.
Right.
Have we notified any of those 10? I know the 10 that's going to be coming up in the meeting. Have we notified any of them?
They've received, all of them have received notice.
Ralph had,
If we move to do the cleanup, contracted out or whatever, to minimize the hard cost, and now we have the meter stock, we know a defined hard cost. Is there any way, instead of leaning the property, to do a special assessment, kind of like a road paving assessment, even if they volunteer and they agree to do it, and that way then it gets paid through taxes or through tax certificate sales, and we don't want to do it if it's, I don't know, is that even remote?
Yes, I've done that.
I mean, it seems like to me that might avoid the whole foreclosure issue, that might get the property cleaned up quickly. And then if we've got it out there as a tax, and then we wouldn't want to do it if we're going to exceed the value of what someone would pay on a tax certificate sale. But in a case where a property's worth $50,000 and there's $3,000 worth of cleanup, you could get someone out there to go buy that tax certificate.
Yes, and that takes it off of us.
Yeah, and then so we've got money coming back in the system now that allows us to start doing more and more cleanups and start this process faster.
tell me that.
And I believe, I don't think the state of Florida,
You said most properties, when you send a foreclosure notice, they almost immediately pay the lien, is that correct?
No, our goal is if we move forward with the foreclosures, that it won't get that far. They'll come in and actually
Maybe
pay
it
it.
was banks.
But we did have a case where, which I think is still open in litigation, so we can't talk about it, but they satisfied those liens before the county actually foreclosed. And we went as far as the title search and stuff with the attorney's office, the BOCC, have the attorney's office look into it.
A day before a forced sale and have them come in and pay.
Right, that's the one I'm talking about, but then
Careful.
there's another open issue with that
Maybe it was
particular
the
property.
banks, you said, when a foreclosure when the banks foreclose on a property that has a code enforcement lien, they almost always pay it.
Oh, yeah. If it's a bank owned and a bank foreclosed on it, we get calls all the time for lien requests or requests to see if there's code violations, expired permits. So they're fully aware, and if there is anything against it, they satisfy it, they clean it up. I usually don't have any problems with the banks cleaning up.
And they pay all of them, administrative and the punitive.
If it's a case that went to the code board, if it's still at staff level, we don't have any problems with them cleaning it up. It doesn't even go that far in the system.
Ron's comment, if we could just clarify on that. If we did that as a special assessment, tax collector collects the money, that's going to still come back to general revenue, right? I mean, that's going to still recycle back into our system.
And to what amount can we levy? What amount can we levy so we can get our money back earlier? instead of having so much money out here on all these things, waiting for year by year by year, is there a maximum that we could levy, okay? So we could get our money back.
We don't want to exceed the value of what someone will, either pay for the property in foreclosure or pay for, hopefully avoid the foreclosure and just pay in tax certificates, so we've got the money coming back in.
Yeah.
There is an issue though with, you don't get lien priority with these, so it's a little bit of a squirrely issue. There's a recent case on a city trying to take code enforcement liens, put them on the tax bill, and trying to trump a prior recorded first mortgage, like a tax would.
We can't do that.
Yeah, so we'd have to be careful and look at that and see how.
Make sure we're in a good position and financially it's worthwhile to do it.
I think the one clear thing everybody agrees on is we
Keeps it
need
off
to
of our
really look at our,
case. We don't have to do it.
I've heard the word
The
hard
increase
cost
on it.
about 100 times now, so I don't want to say it anymore, but we need to look at our real administrative realistically. And like I said, in the beginning of enforcement, I think you'd spend a lot more time on it, but as it drags on, hopefully it won't drag on.
Well, by the time it gets to the board, they're my backbone. I would like to see it.
We need to count attorney time, we need to count their
Do
time.
you know how many cases that we have that are over, with liens on them, that are over 3 months?
While she's looking that up, I'm excited about Ralph's idea of attaching that to the taxes, the debt to the taxes.
I looked into that, Heather, and I want to say that, and I don't think it was Bethany, it might have been prior council, but something with the state of Florida, and they couldn't do a special assessment on taxes for liens, code for liens.
And all over the place.
In Florida.
I think that's the winning
And
formula.
that keeps us being the good
It has to be
guys.
certain,
Would you only do the hard cost, or would you do the whole thing? Like say if the person owed $25,000, would you put a 20, yeah.
Well, it's gonna only be hard costs.
the value.
It's not gonna be
Yeah.
fine.
Right, we're gonna minimize the fines. If we send a team of folks out there to clean it up, and then we're stopping the meter, so we're gonna minimize those punitive fines.
What if the person doesn't want it cleaned up?
Well, then that
That
just,
happens a lot too, doesn't it?
Well, that brings
Then you
it,
wait 3 months and pull the trigger?
yeah, makes it easier to go through with the foreclosure. We're offering you an alternative here, and we're helping you do it, and so,
I have one final issue, well, not final, but I have one issue with code enforcement that I do want to stress is the safety of things and not that it would ever happen in our county, and I hope nothing tragic ever happens in our county, but across the country in the past, there has been some pretty tragic incidences happen, and as a result of trying to forcibly go on and clean some people's property and different things like that. I mean, there's been people killed one way or the other, and I would just, like when Jamie talked about, it's very important to me that if she's ever in that situation, that she would, try to take the right safety measures.
Maybe it's on occasion had deputies accompany her on final inspections and trips. In one case, they found,
Just as soon as you say it could never happen, it's
somebody with a
something.
meth lab, and all of a sudden they,
Yeah, I was walking next to a meth lab and didn't realize it.
I got Jamie,
Yeah.
another question on the ones we're looking at foreclosing on tonight. There's 3 of them both filed the same day, 10/8/2012. One of them's 21,400, one is 13,700, one's 11,000. Why are those vary so wildly? Are they?
It's case by case, just depends on the
They're all
nature of the
$50.
violation. It just depends, each case is, again, I mean, just depends on,
So the $50 a day is not a set.
it could be one that we cleaned up too, and it's the cost that, I mean,
Well, if we take somebody to foreclosure,
okay, one we did clean up, sorry.
not a problem.
Which one? Was that the family
Bud
circle?
Club, or,
No.
Bud Crumb?
Bud Crumb, 21.4. And that property assessed value is only $4,000 on that property right now, so.
And
no, we didn't clean that one up, we cleaned up a blanket, I think.
the actual, I'm not gonna say which one.
One,
or
they're
anything.
one's vacant, one's a rental, and, well, actually 2 are non-owner occupied, and one's vacant property. There's nothing but a pile of debris and stuff on it.
If you just go to foreclosure, you've got all these liens and stuff, and you go to foreclosure, those people will start, they become serious. I would say probably 75% of them will show up to clean up. So,
Two of them are property investment companies.
well then, they may decide it's to their advantage to clean it up themselves. They may, they're not the owner, but they may say, hey, go get Joe and let's clean this thing up. So they pay your hard cost and away we go.
1 of the 10 just happens to be incarcerated.
Well, and that's different. They're gonna be some.
One of the 10 on the list is, I don't want to say which one identified, but 1 of the 10 on the list is one of the ones that is the one I was been referring to. He's going to be out of, kind of disposed for a while, so he would not have any way to willfully comply if he could.
We have to work on those cases individually.
Yes,
Yeah,
There won't be many homeowners who are incarcerated who have a lien against
But you're gonna
Copeland.
find that each case is a case by case.
It's one of these, so
It's the last one I found. Yes.
and if it's all, if this is all done in one motion, that one's lumped in with the 10.
This is the hog place. Hogs over the years, I think.
Well, he don't have them anymore. That's what initially started, it was hogs years ago,
It's
but he
a
don't have
vacant
them
piece of
anymore.
property. There's nothing, there's no structure tied to this piece of property.
Other than his camper.
There's
That's
no
it.
structure.
There's no
I
structure.
think of one case that you mentioned, Ray County, I think the county was gonna have police go in and clean it up, so it wouldn't be,
That's still,
Let's take, for example,
wouldn't be
these,
out of pocket with a private contractor, but that's depriving the county for using his services on some of it.
right, if you have cleaned some of these up, Jamie, let's say, I don't know, just take Blade Crumb Road, $21,400. Say we spent money to clean it up.
now I'll tell you the one we cleaned was the 76 Wooden Lake.
All right, 10/8, whatever if we're gonna foreclose on it, I don't know if it's free and clear, I don't wanna get into, this is an agenda item later on.
We don't know yet, we really need to get title of.
That's
We're
what they're
probably
gonna
never
see
gonna get our
tonight.
money back for what we spent on cleaning it up. Would that sound accurate?
It's a rental property, and it's a livable structure, and it's owned by a property investment company, and the county cleaned it up, and my opinion, as far as staff, there's, it's occupied now, being rented out.
Bad example then. Let's take a,
Assessed value's
You're
13.8
gonna
on
have
that
it, it's
property.
gonna be a case by case.
So that's only 3,000 more than we've got in it.
Right.
let's take a vacant lot.
It's gonna
then.
be, every case is gonna be different.
And the county goes in and cleans it up. We'll never, realistically, never get that money back. I mean, we just need to look at this with our eyes open.
Well-
If we're gonna pay to clean a property up, even if we do it on assessment, if it's voluntary, fine, that's what you're talking about, but if it's involuntary, we'll probably never get our money back. And
It needs
somebody's
to make sense. It needs to financially make sense.
paying for that.
Well, if there's a way somehow we can find out whether there are other, mortgages on it, liens on it, before the county does exhaust funds to clean it up.
I don't think we ought to be spending our money cleaning things up for other people. That doesn't make it, if someone just doesn't care about what we think, they think, the neighbors think, and just whatever, we just foreclose.
Do we ever sell any property, just out of curiosity?
We should.
Let's take this one in Lake Ellen. In my mind, if the goal is to clean it up, or any of these, if before we spend our money cleaning it up, why not just offer it at a fire sale for somebody? Sure. We don't get anything, but at least we don't lose anything and say, here's a lot for $2,000, but you gotta clean it up. Just an idea. I'd rather see us
After we
do that.
foreclose.
Huh?
After we
After you
foreclose.
foreclose.
Yeah.
Instead of us spending $4,000 or $5,000.
No, we don't wanna do that.
Mhm.
You don't wanna do that. Just put it out on the market at
I've never seen the county sell anything. I may be wrong on
Did you
that.
ever figure out how many,
There's about 28, 30, there's over 36, but I think 10 of them are coming tonight, so like 28 maybe, 26.
so Randy, there's a 10 you're getting tonight, Jake, you said there's another 26.
Yeah, about 26.
3 months threshold, this is gonna dump a workload on you.
There's another 26 in addition to the 10?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
included in Heather's account, her
No,
contract.
it's hourly, but you get your cost from the foreclosure.
You'll be able
We
to
need to
recover.
put Heather in our, I hate to say this word again, hard cost.
It is.
I believe,
cost
yeah, on the
$150
spreadsheet.
when you apply for a lien release is not included, obviously.
No, no, no.
I don't know what Maximus looked at.
I don't know how I got the book, but they have a little section
Now,
for
there's
code
there's a
enforcement.
flat fee when you apply for a lien forgiveness.
That's totally separate than the administrative charge. The administrative charge is $150 that's automatically imposed for prosecuting the case. So anytime I send a code case to the code board for recommendation of whatever fines imposed, they will assess that $150 administrative charge.
What's the charge after that then? When it's in violation?
They can impose up to $250 per day if they wanted to.
But is there an administrative cost?
That is, no.
No,
All right, that's what we need to change, in my opinion.
They can go up
There's
to
a punitive charge, and
$250.
because if we're paying Heather to prosecute these or whatever, follow through on, then we're not charging the violator or whoever buys the property to get that money
So we
back.
should increase the daily fine.
Well, it needs to be split in two components, in my mind.
Okay, so you
Administrative,
should have an administrative charge for
Cannot be waived.
prosecuting the case.
that cannot be waived, no matter who buys it or owns it. Then a punitive charge that, in my mind, can't be waived if you're the original violator, but if you buy it and clean it up, I think we should be allowed to waive that portion.
What if we track time spent? Some you'll spend a lot more time on, and basically like billable hours, and you log it, you know?
Well, that's,
Obviously, if you would do
All of our time is
It's
tracked
billable.
that way,
It's
but
tracked.
it would be,
Yeah.
case number and what have you, right?
If you got one that's taking 10 times more time, they should pay 10 times the administrative
Others
fee.
pay enough to charge for, but it's...
well, what we're hoping with having the additional full-time officer, that we will eliminate this time-consuming process. We issue our notice of violation, provided that we received proper notification. It's your standard 30-day, and then you have your notice of hearing that's sent to the code board, and then they give them an additional time frame to comply. So we're hoping to eliminate these ongoing ones. Now that we have an extra person, we can start prosecuting.
Can we start the foreclosure process in 90 days?
Well, after 3 months of the lien, of the date the lien was recorded, we can consider moving forward with foreclosure.
Are you
The
talking
next
about?
step in that process.
Are you talking about being within 90 days or outside of 90 days?
We have to wait the 3 months, if I'm not mistaken.
Before you can even start the proceedings, or before you can actually file the foreclosure?
Well, that's usually before they can bring it to us, recommending us to recommend to you, to start the...
Once the 3
Well,
months
I'm
is
saying
up,
is if
staff
there's a way-
staff will refer it to the county attorney's office,
There's a
and
way to
then from there.
automatically start the foreclosure proceeding after 3 months. You know what I mean? Instead of saying, all right, now we want to proceed with foreclosure, then you got another 3 or 4 or 5 months. That way, I think we'd be more likely for them to come up and correct the violation immediately instead of, you know what I mean?
I like
It
that.
wouldn't be
If that can be done, I like that.
It wouldn't be that large a dollar amount, because it wouldn't have the...
So what do you,
and you guys voted at your last meeting to put that wording in your order.
Right.
That would consider, it'd be the code board's recommendation for the county attorney. We'd still bring them to you, though, after the 3
But after
months.
3 months, you'd automatically,
Correct.
their recommendation to start foreclosure, instead of having to go back through the process all over.
correct, that was just recently brought up to our code board, and it's going to be added in the orders, so it eliminates an
I
extra
think
step.
the
It's
sooner we
straight.
can foreclose, that means it's gonna be a smaller dollar amount, and it's not gonna be quite so
I think it's better for everybody.
hard on them. And they probably go ahead and pay it off.
Yeah.
Just to be
Now,
done with it.
If it goes
we bring
through.
these to you all to get authority to initiate the process and file. Do you want us not have that step in the process either? Where they're just automatically filed?
Well, I would say yes, but I'm sure Richard would say no, because one of the ones that's on here tonight, you just
That's,
pull off.
I would just as soon pull that one I'm actively working with, but yet it's not, hasn't been gotten working with yet, but he's incarcerated, he's not gonna be able to do one way or the other. You know.
Richard, that's where we can make a decision as a board on that.
Yes, sir.
You pull that one off, and that's a
We
special
need to be
case or
very
whatever.
careful.
I would say, yeah, I'd be very cautious. Understand that your code board has already heard all the evidence of this. You guys will not have been privy to that evidence and everything that's went on necessarily, unless you do a thorough investigation, which would take days and days and days to do. to me, you gotta listen to your code board. And for
Absolutely.
you to pick and choose, that's setting the county up for potential lawsuits of favoritism, of, whatever, just, you're setting it up for big time there.
We could generally say that we will not go forward on anybody who's incarcerated.
Well, but you see what I'm saying, y'all gotta be
I see what you're
real
saying.
careful.
Yeah, I mean, but this is your code board
Yeah, that's-
for, I mean, you
But the
guys
point is,
them in
the
here.
code board's privy to all that.
Yeah,
I would
When
say,
they
my
see the
opinion
case.
is take it out of the hands of politicians and
Yes.
automatically go into foreclosure. That way we don't have to worry about it. We don't have a dog in the fight. We can't say, look,
You gotta take the personalities out, and that's what that does.
politicians.
I agree with that, Mr.
absolutely.
Chairman.
It's gonna, if it automatically goes into foreclosure, Annie, you get all upset with me. When we start fighting, so just,
Well, they didn't say that now.
I mean, the people have had ample opportunity
They have.
to bring it in. If it's a shed they didn't get a building permit for, they could,
and on this,
Go
in
get
the
a permit.
agenda item, you see the lien date, what you don't see is the date when these were initiated.
I actually had.
2006, 2008, 2009. The most recent one is January 7th of 2011. So these people have had a lot of time.
all right, tell me why then, I thought the lien started accruing after the code enforcement board. Where'd this long period of 3 or 4, 5 years come in?
Well,
Between you and...
once the lien's filed, it's just a matter of after 3 months. That's why we added the language this go around to where we bypass that
I
step.
think the chairman is asking.
The time gap
These have been
between
there,
that
so
date
why does it look like
this date.
2012 lien dates?
You were
we-
working with them before it went to the code board, or the code board decided not to do the liens, or...
No, the lien is filed with the order imposing the fines once the compliance date's passed at the code board level.
Shouldn't they be closer to the same date, though, is what I'm saying?
He's asking why
From
all
two-
these were filed in 2012.
Well, there
There,
was one case,
I know.
the Thoreau case, where I just signed the lien the other day, and there was an administrative mix-up, Bethany was leaning and everything else. So that, then we just didn't meet and say, let's file a lien, and the next board meeting, I had the lien signed.
What I'm saying is that
It was discovered that all previous certified, or orders were not certified, recorded, there was an error.
that's fine.
And
I'm saying-
so everything had to be re-recorded.
That's fine. The date of the lien theoretically should be 3 months after the code board finds it in violation. Is that correct?
From the time that the order is recorded with the clerk's office with the
Once they've been
lien,
given,
after 3
once the
months of
code board
that.
gives them a time frame to bring in compliance on the date that expires, it should be the date the lien is dated, correct? Because that's when fines start accruing. Am I reading that right?
No, okay.
We'll give them 30 days, say July 1st, give them compliance.
After they come to the code board.
Then we issue an affidavit.
And then Jamie comes back after our meeting, after July 1st, says that this property is not in compliance.
That should be the day of the
So
lien.
the fines have already started, the fines have already started to
Day of the
accrue.
lien or the day of the
The
fine?
day of the lien should be dated
Now,
that
this
day.
is-
The fines have already started accruing on July 2nd in this case. Say our next meeting is August. So we have already accumulated 30 days worth of fines before we go ahead and issue the order for the lien. So the lien.
You're lost.
But they should be closing date, is all I'm saying.
Okay.
You shouldn't be getting a lien in 2012 saying you've been fined since 2008, I think is what he's trying.
There was a prior.
They were noticed in 2008.
But were they given a lien in 2008?
Yes, they were given a lien in
Okay.
2008.
Two liens on that one property.
Yes.
Yes.
Two
This is
different
just the
cases.
lien we're recommending foreclosure on. The prior lien is still there, and was still active as putting potential purchaser and the property owner on notice. But we'll be foreclosing on the liens that are dated in your agenda item.
That are the most recent.
Jamie said because they're pushing more through the code board, we may have to go back to monthly meetings. David, is there sufficient budgetary coverage to cover the attorney fees and staff fees for those additional meetings?
Well, the attorney fees is just.
Attorney fees part of it, staff is, they're already paid anyway, so.
I want to stress really hard again that I think we, just to avoid situations like Richard's being put in now, we need to take politicians or any person really out of it. Say, well, this one here is okay and this one isn't. I mean, it needs,
Can't
my
pick and
mind needs to
choose.
be
I think
automatic.
it's an all or nothing.
When it hits
Hey.
a certain milestone, it kicks it in. You know, I don't know what to say.
Heather, does that change the language that comes back to the code board? Where instead of us recommending to the attorneys to do it, it's the authorized?
I mean, imagine if your sewer bill,
I'll
you
get
didn't pay it.
authorization from
You felt sorry for them and said, don't worry about paying your sewer bill.
I'll get authorization.
You can't do that.
Hey, I want to pay my sewer bill either. You know, automatically, if you don't pay your sewer bill, your water gets cut.
Well, and I think, Richard, what you're doing is what you should do, you're trying to help out, and you're doing
I'm honestly
exactly.
trying to help the person.
But what I would do is go to the code board, and I used to be a code board member. Go to the
You
code,
were on the board in this case,
I think I was too. And go to the code board and tell them what you're up against and what you're doing in the case and everything, or have someone do that. And the code, well, but still, in another instance, the code board, they'll listen at it if their goal is not to be foreclosed on the property, their goal is to get it cleaned up, so that's where communicating with those board would be the route to take.
Right. And I'll be honest, it's strictly humanitarian reasons of why I'm trying to help the
That's
person.
good.
But at this point, again, it's agenda item later tonight,
I'll help, you know.
it's, well, sounds like it's gonna be a long
Richard and
night.
I have talked at length on this case, and I think maybe Ralph and I too. And that's the type of case where your non-governmental entities in the county need to step forward. Your churches, your nonprofit organizations, and your hospice people, or your Habitat, you still building houses? Habitat for Humanity, to maybe build a house or something like that. Indigent, not the county.
And I have a list of resources that I provide.
I'm a board member on the Habitat for Humanity board, and that's something that I have been thought about bringing before me. But anyway, this
Now,
is different.
because it looks like Ralph's gonna go along with Richard on this, this is gonna end up being a dog mess tonight. If you do anything with these foreclosures, that it can either be put off to give him a chance, everybody has the same chance to appeal or anything, or is either yes or no.
Can I just recommend removing the one?
That's exactly what we're trying to avoid.
I know.
Well, aren't we telling her to take a look and find out if it's gonna be
Everybody the same. You
viable?
can't just say, I like this guy, with all due respect, I like this guy, I'm trying to help him, we need to take his lien off, or his foreclosure off. What about all these other people on here too?
They're not,
They need the same?
they're not in jail.
It is what it is, I just gotta do what I can on my end.
Well, it doesn't matter. You gotta treat everybody, and we gotta set rules based on what's good for everybody.
This is not something we need to be arguing about, whose lien gets,
Can't pick
who we
and
like better
choose.
than somebody
That's
else. So is there any way everybody could be treated the same, either by continuing the item and then giving them, this item tonight, and I'll talk about item later tonight, is to give you direction to go to foreclosure, correct?
I'm not gonna file complaints tomorrow. I have to order title searches. I may find some of these properties, there may be prior mortgages where it doesn't even make sense for us to initiate foreclosure. And we've looked at some of that stuff, but we need to look at it officially.
Is it out of the code board's hands now?
Yes,
We
it's,
came and recommended
out of
for
our
you
hands.
to go ahead and.
So Richard could not do what you're suggesting, which is good.
It's not, I was saying just for instance,
Too
it
late
could
for
have
that
done,
now.
too late for that.
All right, well,
but we would still
y'all think
have
about this real
to,
carefully now, because if we're gonna play favoritism, for whatever reason, we're gonna look really, really bad.
Okay, but Heather, wouldn't you bring it back to the BOCC with your findings? No? It'll go automatic
Say no to all of them, or say yes to all of them?
On this, on this meeting.
Yeah, tonight.
Tonight's
But
meeting.
if we say no, then these can come back to us.
If we say no, don't proceed, then we're stopping all these foreclosures we just talked about.
Okay, but can Richard then go to it's already out of your hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
not,
yeah, it's in your hands.
So he
this
has,
whole thing may be out of my hands at this point.
yeah, I think it is.
Really.
You said no to all 10. I would ask you another question. Why should the code board bother on the additional 26 that are gonna be coming up?
Because because I'm not wanting to set a precedent or nothing, it's just,
I think Richard's case is just like mine when I was trying to help this lady, this one particular person on her mobile home in Wakulla Gardens. I was doing everything I could, and there just was absolutely no way that we could do that.
And if you vote no, the next question I'm gonna ask you is, when do we wanna go ahead and shut down code enforcement? Because this is just like, all this is being is just telling the sheriff, hey, you can go out there and you can go talk to people, you can't arrest a soul. But you can go talk to people and ask them not to do that. I would recommend shutting it down and being done.
And you were
Pull
just,
one of these off and treat it different than the other ones.
You're
We're
exactly right.
absolutely opening ourselves up.
and you were also just saying why it's taking as long as it's taking. Why are these liens going on as long as they are? Well, this will put another halt
What,
in the process.
for when that property's gonna be done? You said you're getting March.
it was this past weekend is whenever I was talking to the group, and they're talking to some other groups, so it's still in the works. I don't have a definite time frame.
They get it in compliance.
You know-
Is there any hope that it doesn't go into foreclosure?
How long?
Doesn't have anything to do with it, really.
We just talked about it. If they bring it into
I
compliance, we don't have to go
It
through
varies. I mean, the big
Yeah.
hurdle I would see with this one is getting the process moving quickly would be serving the individual, because we don't necessarily,
You know where it is.
well,
There is a way forward. If we vote to go, and I'm talking about this now because all the code enforcement people are here. If we go ahead and tell you to move forward all these, he still has hope of this person not going through foreclosure, is that what you're saying? If they bring it into compliance,
What's the time
that's
frame
not
that
gonna
it would
be, I
take?
mean,
Would
the
it take like
compliance
60
or
days?
not is not gonna really be a factor that I would consider.
Well, he would then have to
It's past
go
all
back to
that.
you
Yeah.
folks to get a reduction in the liens.
And we can always we can go to foreclosure and negotiate an amount. I mean,
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna suggest. If it gets that far, maybe you could talk to the person, and the county might be willing to work with him if it goes that far,
I can't stress this enough, we have to
as
treat
far as the
everybody the same.
property
All right, so
itself.
let me see if I get this. We send all these to foreclosure, and any of these particular people, clean them up, and they don't want it to go to foreclosure. They correct the problem before, that's what we're looking for, is for them to correct the problem before foreclosure. So they're all able to do that.
Some of them are already corrected.
Okay, well then, we need to just go ahead and send them and see how many of them will
They
correct.
have to apply,
Well, that's okay, they can do that.
Not,
if they bring it into compliance, they don't have to apply for a waiver.
oh, yeah, that's if they bring in the complaint. We're past that in this process with these cases and where we are with the foreclosure.
they've had all those
They've
opportunities.
had those options they've had their chance.
You said somewhere in compliance, only because the
But
county.
the county cleaned them up, correct.
So you're saying they cannot request a waiver after it gets to the lien
They
status?
should have already, but that time has
But
expired.
let's say they
and now
didn't,
we're
they
here.
just put their head in the sand and they didn't. But now we forced the foreclosure, are they able to come back now and
And
say
they can
it's in compliance and maybe a reduction or a forgiveness or, I mean, is that
That
procedurally?
would be through judicial process at this point now.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
once
think
we
it's past-
file, it's not gonna,
Once they got the foreclosure notice, then somehow an attorney representing them
Yes.
would have to come back and
Mhm.
try to negotiate.
And they satisfy the lien.
So once,
Whatever, it's.
Yeah.
That's right, it's
Yes.
negotiated
Right.
out, that's right.
yeah.
So they technically, every one of these people could technically pay the lien, pay the problem, correct the problem, and keep the property.
Correct.
Oh, absolutely. We have never, I don't think we've ever taken title to a piece of property
No.
through foreclosure. They typically pay.
There is,
Well, then we need to go
And that's what happened
forward.
in the one
There's a path
case.
forward.
so
we need to treat everybody the same. Everybody needs to have the same path forward.
you mentioned the judicial process. Once the foreclosure starts, it's out of our hands. We don't have any,
No, it's then we can work with their attorney and,
okay.
Right, and that's what I was saying, is the commission can work with him.
If they correct.
So just
there
to
is
be
still hope,
clear,
Richard.
do we have a consensus of the board, not just for these 10 that are here, but for the future, that these don't need to come to us, that they can be handled without
That
coming
would be
to
my
us?
preference. What Howard is asking, does everybody agree that when it hits, that we set milestones, whatever they are, and right now I think it's 3 months, that it automatically proceeds to foreclosure without having to come back to us?
I
and say,
agree with
Do you
him.
want it to go to foreclosure or not?
I agree.
Why don't we
Code board is-
explore the special assessment also, though? Maybe we can just avoid the whole foreclosure issue,
All right,
and
let's assume
we just
that
get
they
it paid
don't-
through taxes.
Let's assume they have refused to clean it up then.
Right now, your code board had just did that at their last meeting, so that language was added in their orders.
I agree with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
I could go along with that, but I'm saying the ones that are not voluntarily, you know what I mean? Just, I'm not gonna do it, or I don't live here, this is a rental, I don't care about it, I'm not gonna do anything about it. They would automatically.
Full speed ahead,
Automatically go to foreclosure.
I agree.
Seems like
I mean, at least we're giving them a path. We'll help you with this, we'll assess the property, you know, if it's financially beneficial for us to do so, we'll get it collected through taxes or through tax sales.
That's a different issue, but.
I know, but we say, okay, you've got that route to choose, or pay us in full, or we head to foreclosure. You got three paths.
And then we're all, I think, is that clear enough for anybody?
That's clear, I completely understand.
You guys could probably maybe add that to any motion tonight on the county.
And also-
attorney.
also-
You're saying
Formal vote on it.
Then also, it wouldn't come back to the full board?
For
No.
foreclosure recommendation, no. It
No,
wouldn't- you guys had voted on that at your last meeting.
you've already taken action
we
and already
could-
poured it on.
Let's go back to
So
Ralph.
it's passed.
No, new ones, I'm saying new ones coming up. We wouldn't see it.
That's correct. You would not see.
Let me be clear with
foreclosure.
Ralph.
Us or you, let's see.
Let me be,
It automatically go into to that process after 3 months.
first, one thing real quick, we've all, I think, agreed to, we need to look at our administrative costs and make those more realistic. That's another clear direction from us. All right, on this automatic thing, along with Ralph's idea, if they automatically go into foreclosure, and let's say that they just couldn't afford to clean it up, and they're willing to do the assessment part, how could they then do that? They'd be in foreclosure, they'd come to the county and say, look, I'd like to negotiate with you to...
Wouldn't that be done prior to foreclosure?
Yeah, that would be a separate path,
Right.
that we would have to catch them earlier in the process.
That
You have some
avoids the
procedural
foreclosure.
We would need
steps
to set
before
up
you.
a procedure then to catch that earlier in the
Yeah.
process,
Right.
that's my point, so it doesn't get, what, a foreclosure, wait, I wanted to do this or that, I wanted to do this assessment, if we can make the assessment work, obviously.
Well, I'm just thinking that if I don't have the ability to pay the cleanup, but you say, well, we'll send someone out and we're gonna put the taxes against your property, and I know that's still kicking it down the road, and I might not have the ability to pay my taxes either, but I'm not gonna lose my property right now. Exactly. I mean, after, what, 3 years or whatever the number is now, then I might lose my property, but at
County will
least
get the money.
county will get the money. We're using investors' money basically to cover the cost of this, and we're avoiding the foreclosure process probably in most cases. And if someone doesn't want to cooperate, we can say, well, we've given you these options, you know.
Most of these weren't homestead properties, none of them were homestead properties.
None of them are homestead, we can't foreclose
So
on
keep in
them.
mind, all these properties are either somebody living in a camper on them, or they're rental properties, or they're vacant lots.
Well, and the only ones you're gonna have that obviously have the special assessment on is ones where the owner assents. I mean, or the owner's occupying it, or because you don't wanna, if the tenant is making the code violation, I think you'd be asking for an issue if you then put it on the owner's property tax bill. But it is their ultimate responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with that because they need to be
One of the
responsible for
cases
what their
was just
tenant
like
is
that.
doing.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
you're talking about a step before foreclosure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be,
Now, who would initiate that and who would authorize that?
this board would have to do that. The earliest you could do that would be next
Why
summer
don't y'all put some thinking on it, Ron, and
because of
you know
the
how the system
statutory
works better than we
requirements.
do. Just at what point would you give someone the option, if we could even agree on how to set it up, that, look,
Well,
county will finance, basically county will finance cleaning up your property.
when you go into foreclosure, you've got, if they don't show up at the foreclosure, then basically we wind up with the property. If their attorney shows up at the foreclosure, then we can negotiate out this assessment at that time. So we don't have to do it prior to the foreclosure. If the owner of the property comes in and,
But we're not gonna be putting, the one thing is, with if you did a special assessment, it's only gonna be hard property cleanup costs. It's not gonna be fines.
Right, because you've stopped that.
lien fines.
Fines. You've
That-
stopped
Well,
it
that,
earlier.
we wouldn't be able to put those on
Along with what
there.
I'm saying is that these go to foreclosure, this first one here, 80C Estelle Drive, $5,108, their attorney can go to you, Heather, and say, negotiate maybe one of those negotiation tools could be, you pay for it, and I'll pay for it on my assessment. Could you do it at that time instead of adding an
I'm sure we
extra
could,
step?
I'm sure we could.
Yeah, so we don't have to send it back.
It'd still go, we'd still tell
We
her
don't
to
have to
proceed
send it
with
back.
foreclosure, but they wouldn't go to
Yeah.
fruition.
That's right.
because the
And we
person-
don't have to send it back to them.
Well, just by doing it ahead of time, we avoid the additional
Yeah, I agree.
attorney's fees, title search fees, things like that, and maybe we can just avoid.
The way you could do it in advance of all of this, and then put some money back on the code enforcement staff, is before they come to the code board recommending foreclosure, or to the attorney staff, they would have to go back to the homeowner, and say, we're ready to initiate foreclosure, however, here's one other option that you might want to consider.
Don't they get a less pens in the mail for doing a foreclosure? So, I mean, they're gonna know before we spend really, I mean, do you have to do title search and everything before you send that out?
We do, to make sure that it's worth sending out. Now, anything, as I said before, the amounts that you're looking at in this agenda item, the only a portion of those would ever be able to be put onto a special assessment. You're not gonna put fines, you're not gonna put things like that, you're only gonna put hard cleanup costs, because you have to provide a special benefit to property in order to legally put a special assessment on the tax bill. And fines and those kind of things don't do that.
Fines are not, but hard costs would cover.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Only
fines
hard
or
costs.
penalty.
What about your
Fines-
time then?
So you-
Attorney
yeah,
time,
and you only
staff
got
time?
You could include some of those reasonable costs.
And this would be going forward anyway, this wouldn't be, we couldn't retroactively
No,
do it
no,
to
we're not
these
gonna do
things.
that.
It would be going forward, and we'll head off those punitive fines, because we'll stop that process sooner.
So I would ask Richard
Makes
if,
the final decision, if you send them a notice of foreclosure, they come in and say, we want to negotiate.
talk
Who
about
approves
it during the thing, if you wanna talk about
Take
it, fine.
it back to the board, say this foreclosure.
Well, I'm,
Kick somebody out there. You know what I mean?
yeah, I ain't wanting, I won't make any issue out of it, but I may vote no.
That's fine.
I mean, I may vote no, but y'all have enough votes to pass
I
it,
know
but
we're wrapping up.
I may vote no.
Code board will be on the
I won't
foreclosure.
bring it up.
I think that's what,
Well, also though, we had one case where, the person paid under a 12-month contract that the code board, you signed as the chairman, or it might have been Paul, where we had a lot of property owner to pay monthly installments to repay the lien back, and it was satisfied. And so we didn't have to foreclose, and the code board approved that installment agreement
Instead of
to
doing
pay
it-
back the liens.
Just do an installment plan like you do with back sewer bills and.
Right, and we've done that before, and
Maybe
we,
another $150, Jamie's worth out paying the fine.
yeah,
Come in with $20
yeah, something, right.
We're gonna wrap up, it's 4:30, we got another
Yes.
meeting at 5, David?
All right, one of the things we need to do, we talked about a lot of stuff here, Jamie,
I know.
okay? And some of the, we can't act on anything that we got right here, right now. We've got to come back with a change of procedures, policies / ordinances, et cetera. So we'll need to work with Lynn and Heather and you, and Jamie and, or James, and let's get these brought back up, kind of regurgitate what's happened here.
Okay.
Y'all regurgitate it, and we gotta bring it back up and have if it's a policy change, there's a lot of stuff talked about, policy change or whatever, and let's bring it back in an organized manner, back to the board, let them vote on it, and then we can enact it, but we can't enact anything that we talked about today, so.
No, but just to clarify, you want to have a policy to add a punitive charge and your administrative charge, one that can't be waived and one that can,
Realistic administrative charge.
and look into the special assessment side of things with the liens as well.
And change it to automatic foreclosure after. whatever.
Our code board has done that already, so that's,
But I think that it was just to look at making the administrative charge realistic, because the
Yeah.
fines are already your punitive portion, so
Right.
those are already there.
We just need to come up with
oh,
a
okay.
hourly figure or a cost on what it takes.
If we waive
Yeah.
waive the fines, there's parts that we don't even have the authority to waive, that's what I'm trying to get at.
Right.
Be administrative,
Hard
needs to
cost.
be a good hard administrative
And figure out what the hard
Money
cost
out of
is for each
taxpayers'
case.
dollars that have to be repaid.
Okay.
All right, I think we had a good meeting.
Commissioner
Yeah, we had a
Kessler,
real good meeting.
did we cover everything that you?
No, but that's good though.
All
All of your board meetings will be at 5 o'clock, you know that?
Yep.
Okay, so what I'll make certain, Jamie, if we come up with another one of these requests for reduction,
For now, anyway.
Yeah. We got an item on the agenda.
I'll make sure that either myself or our vice chairman is there to speak. Because when you guys made your decision on the Thoreau property, there was never any